Hello again, Chris Lee and Alfred Ezman of Southeastern 14 here to discuss the Lexington Regional. That contains number 1 seed Kentucky, followed by, in order, number 2 Indiana State, Illinois, and Western Michigan. We'll talk about the Cats and the other 3 teams in this regional. Before we do that, a reminder, we are brought to you by BetOnline, your number 1 source for all your summer sports this season, from MLB, golf, the NBA, and the NHL playoff stats, all the latest stats, news, and scores available to follow your favorite teams. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups and player props and odds on just about every team and every sport out there. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, we're going to show you some key stats and players for every team. So we will go in order of the number 1 seed, the Kentucky Wildcats, and work down 2, 3, 4, and then make our predictions. So let's start with the Kentucky Wildcats. And we have talked about this team all year. The lineup, just one that's not a lot of fun to pitch to. Not the most dominant lineup in terms of home run hitters, but boy, that didn't stop the Cats from scoring runs. What makes Kentucky tricky are these things, these walk rates. They chase up pitch counts. They steal bases. You can see some guys over here that do that. They don't strike out a ton. You got pretty consistent on-base rates up and down the lineup. You've also got some handedness. You got some lefties. You got some switch hitters. You got plenty of righties. But the 2 guys that make this lineup go, Ryan Waldschmidt, who I think might be the most underrated hitter in the league, and then Ryan Nicholson, their Cincinnati transfer at first base, who was the biggest power threat with 18 home runs, but really not an easy spot in this lineup to pitch to with Kentucky. And that's what made the Cats co-champions of the SEC.
Yes, it was. And I would say Waldschmidt and Nicholson were 2 of the most impressive guys at the plate batting in Hoover while they were there. And another guy I want to make note of, Nolan McCarthy in center field, was very good on defense. He covered a lot of ground against fly balls out there in Hoover as well. Really impressed. The two things I want to point out with first with Nicholson, the on-base percentage, pretty much 400, 399, slugging percentage well over 600. And then even you go down here, switch hitting Nick Lopez at the DH. He's been awesome this year. Nice mustache. You got to be able to switch hit and be a DH, I guess. So, but either way, on-base percentage, 430, slugging almost 600 there with him as well. It's a tough lineup. I think we definitely thought about it. We definitely weren't sure if it was going to be that way to start the season. But now that we're here in the NCAA tournament, we know what they're about as the 2nd national seed, and they have the offense to go as far as they want.
Yeah, just a tough lineup to pitch to top to bottom, and one that, as you pointed out, they defend pretty well too. Now the pitching, not spectacular, but pretty steady. Poozer, Neiman, and Moore were good most of the year. Poozer, their best guy. And, I mean, look, one thing that's not on here is ground ball rate. These guys really keep the ball on the ground. They keep it in the yard. You can see some really good home run rates. The only guy that really struggled was Johnny Hummel, their closer, who gave up home runs 7% of the time. It wasn't really getting hit when he wasn't giving up home runs. And I think South Carolina did a lot of that. But you've got a lot of veteran guys here. You got a couple lefties in the pen, and Nove and Byers who've been around. There's more guys than we've got on this list that can pitch. But Poozer, their best guy, and some other guys that just were, again, Neiman and Moore were steady most of the year. Travis Smith, maybe their most talented guy in that 4-hole, did not pitch well in the SEC tournament. Again, not a spectacular staff, but one that does what it needs to do and pitches to that ballpark. And that was the formula to go in 22-8 in the SEC.
Yeah, with Johnny Hummel, we were talking about him in that home run rate. Look right next to it to the left, that base runners per inning rate below 1. Yeah. He's a tough guy to get the ball to hit. You could get a home run against him, but it's tough to do that to begin with. And I'd have to imagine with that Kentucky crowd behind him in Lexington, it's going to be very, very tough for opposing teams to do anything major. 2 guys in the SEC tournament in the bullpen that were really good. I thought Cameron O'Brien looked great. I think that was the South Carolina game. They did lose the game, but he did very good that game while they were down, allowing them to come back a little bit. Jackson Nove looked a little shaky, but you could see he's still pretty solid there through the year as a whole. Low home run rate, K rate up at 28%. O'Brien's is also up at 29%. Poozer's had it all year. That's what I meant to say. Sorry, stumbling on my words there. But Poozer's had it all year. Neiman's been nice. Like I said, one of the more winning pitchers in the SEC. Very good guy with control, and they have the pitching. If it comes alive and if it hits all at once, from the starters to the bullpen to the closer and Hummel, it's also just a recipe for success that the Wildcats can use.
All right, let's move on to the number 2, Mitch Hanna's Indiana State Sycamores. I've seen these play several times the last few years. And this is a team that I thought was kind of like Kentucky, but the more I look at them, not quite, because they get it more done with the long ball, which I think is atypical for how he's assembled his teams. But you got, 4 guys there with 15 or more bombs. Some guys that don't walk a lot. I'm talking about Hugh Grant McGill and Luis Hernandez. They are not there to take first base on a free pass. So throw your strikes and see what happens with them. They don't run a lot, but this is a team that I think has got more power than you would think of when you think of the mid-major teams. And again, this is one that's done it on grittiness and defense and things like that in the past. But this team's built a little differently. Pretty left-handed heavy. Got a switch hitter in there. I mean, I say that. You got 4 righties, 4 lefties, and a switch hitter among your main 9. Again, that's something that's tough to pitch to in a regional. And then the pitching is kind of interesting. ERAs were pretty good. The runners per innings pitch didn't always correlate with that, but they kept the ball in the park. They did walk some guys. Those are higher free pass rates than you'd like out of your starting staff. But these 2 lefties out of the pen, or this one in particular, Zach Davidson, did not give up a lot of runners, kept the ball in the park, 39% strikeout rate, 9% walk rate. That's outstanding. Feels like Hannah's staffs the last few years, they got about 5 or 6 guys that can really pitch, and it kind of drops off after that. This one might be a little bit deeper than some of those past staffs. Not a dominant arm here other than maybe Davidson out of the pen, who threw a lot of innings in relief. But again, the combination, like Kentucky, of the pitching and the hitting, good enough to get this team a long way. And this was a team that a lot of people thought would be hosting a regional due to that top 10 RPI.
Yeah, D1 baseball had them, I think, for the last 2 weeks of the season, including conference tournament play. They had them hosting for all of that. A little shocking to say the least, but I'm sure they're a team that could definitely play with Kentucky if they put their mind to it. Some other pitchers I want to point out in there, their number 1 starter, Jared Spencer. ERA, nothing crazy, but not a lot of home runs, good amount of strikeouts. And, that's, usually you can get a lot of good starts out of that. It just depends on what you get out of him. And then Jacob Pruitt, their 4th starter, ERA, very good. 2.28 there. Home run rate, not too bad. And then 35% strikeouts. He's also, a guy who can, deliver the punch out blow. And I think that's the key with them in their pitching. If they're delivering strikeouts, it's going to be a long day for you, and you're going to have your offense, clicking if you're going to want to beat them. So that's the big key. As for their offense, looking at that, power team, I don't know if, Kentucky, I know Hummel's had some problems, we said, with the long ball, but I just, if they can get the home run ball going, they're another team that they're a team that can really, stack up some wins. And who knows, maybe that's the recipe. If they get their home run ball going and they're pitching their strikeouts, they could walk out of Lexington into a super regional.
Yeah, the strikeout minus free pass rates really stand out to me. This is a team that strikes out a lot of guys, and they don't walk a ton of guys. So that's something to watch for. Now, again, those were racked up against non-SEC competition for the most part. It's different than what Kentucky played, but just to recognize what State did in its regular season, and the Missouri Valley, which is not a bad league at all. They had a pretty special season. All right, Illinois, the 3 seed here. 5 guys, double-digit home runs. They don't run a lot. Some decent walk rates here. Several guys with 425 plus on base rates. Again, Big Ten, not the pitching that you saw in the SEC for sure. But a decent baseball league. The pitching side, not a lot stands out there. Their bottom end of the bullpen wasn't great. I guess Joe Glassy, the guy to watch for, did not walk a lot of guys. Yeah, I mean, you got some guys that kept the ball in the park. That's not really Kentucky's thing, but you see some home run rates under 2.5%. That's really good. You know, top 2 starters pitched decently, dropped off from there like most teams. I don't know really what you say about the Fighting Illini. I think you saw them play a little bit, didn't you, back in February?
Yeah, way back when they came to Knoxville. They're definitely, I mean, they're not as much, I don't know, the home runs probably picked up later. They were definitely, you know, not the biggest home run team. I know Ryan Moorman out there in right field, he has a lot of home runs. There's a few others too. Westcott up there, the first baseman. Look at the handedness, Chris. A lot of right-handers in that lineup. Only 2 lefties. My thought process in that is, let's say Illinois were to get a win over Indiana State in that first game and play Kentucky. The Wildcats could use Dominic Neiman in that second start. I'm sorry. They could use, you know, they could go with Poozer in that second start, and that would be a lot of trouble for the Illini if they were to run into him. So that's really what stands out to me. The pitching's nothing crazy. I don't think Illinois is going to win a lot of games here off their pitching. I think it's going to come from their offense and their long ball guys hitting the long ball like they do. They, looking at them as well, a few of the guys that have a lot of home runs strike out a decent bit. Westcott, I'm going to use him again, 26% strikeout rate. He does walk a lot, though, weirdly, along with those strikeouts. So I don't know. The interesting group, we'll have to see, but I think this is going to definitely be an offensive showing from them if they're going to want to get wins.
All right, let's move on to West Michigan, champs of the MAC, alma mater of the famed Jim Bouton, I believe. And by the way, we had a couple of pitching alums for Indiana State. Sean Mania, who was a first-round pick a couple of years ago in the rotation for the Mets, and the other one, Tommy John. You know him for the surgery, but he was a pretty good pitcher back in the day too. So some representation in Major League Baseball. Maybe you didn't expect, although most of that in the rearview mirror. But this team here, you got 3 guys that hit double-digit home runs. You got some decent on-base rates, but nobody, 450 or above that plays every day other than C.J. Richmond. I don't know what you make of these stats. They were accumulated mostly in the MAC. The one thing that you're scared of is that Kentucky is a 1, is a 3 or a 4 with an ace. I don't know that they've really got that unless maybe they pitch Dylan Visek in the 1 hole against Kentucky. I'm going by Friday starters in terms of what they listed. So, yeah, this is what I know about the Broncos is what's in front of me. But I'll say this, they did keep the ball in the park for the most part. Again, that's not really what Kentucky does, is drive the ball out of the yard, but there is that. So, yeah, this is Western Michigan, which will be Kentucky's opponent in the opener.
Yeah, look, kind of a nifty team here. 2 switch hitters in that lineup. A lot can happen. I guess that creates a little bit of problems with pitching. Like, they're going to be able to hit you on your opposite side no matter what. But those two strike out, a fair amount, strikeout rates above 20%, although I guess that's nothing to be too upset about. The one thing I'm looking at Western Michigan right now in their schedule, major wins they had a doubleheader and won both games against Michigan at the beginning of the year. So that's a big Big Ten opponent they played. Lost to Florida State, lost to Michigan State, and another win against Michigan, actually in Ann Arbor, kind of interesting too. So I guess they're very good against the Michigan Wolverines, but we'll have to see if that correlates to what they could do this regional. I guess the other things too, they have a few guys 400 plus with the on-base percentage. I guess if Kentucky decides to start walking people with their pitching, although I don't know if they'll do that. I think they'll be aggressive throwing over the middle of the plate against Western Michigan just to kick off, just to get it right out of the way, out of the gate. I'm not sure. Not a whole lot known. I know they won the MAC, did well in the MAC, and I guess they'll create some problems. But I do think if they're not hitting the long ball, if they're not playing into or with the pitching, if they're not, if they don't give up the long ball, Kentucky doesn't need to do that. They just need to get on base, and if they allow Kentucky to do that, they're in trouble.
Yeah, kind of a middle of the road 4 seed, and Illinois kind of a middle of the road 3 seed. Indiana State, a pretty tough 2, but not the toughest around. It's just hard to know with some of the. I know Indiana State challenges itself and plays some pretty good teams out of the league. And again, Mitch Hanna's a guy that's coached a lot of NCAA tournaments. My concern for Kentucky is the pitching. I feel like the offense has been pretty consistent, except for that bout with Luke Holman and Hoover. But yeah, I mean, I think that they just bludgeon you with the bats. Again, not a lot of long balls, but just the type of offense that's going to do well in a regional because they run up pitch counts and challenge you. My concern is the pitching after Poozer. I'm not sure entirely who I trust, but they've got a lot of options. Look, Nick Mingione went 22-8 in the SEC, and I know they missed some of the big teams, and you can parse whatever you want with this team, but the bottom line is this is 2 years in a row Mingione is going to a regional. Last year they went to a super. In fact, they've gotten paired with anybody else other than LSU. Might have been in Omaha. In Indiana State, with the way it can hit the long ball, if the wind's blowing out there, could maybe give them some trouble. I don't know what to make of Illinois outside of the home run power. I don't feel like that's a staff with staying power. Feels to me like a regional is going to come down between Kentucky and Indiana State. I'm just not sure in a war pitching attrition. It depends on what State does in game 1 and 2. In terms of if we're forecasting like a Sunday night game between the teams, I worry that's when Indiana State will run out of pitching. Kentucky was just so good anywhere, anytime against anybody. I wasn't really going to pick against him anyway, but talking it through, I do have some concerns. Indiana State might be good enough to take them down, but I'm not going to bet on it. Give me the Cats to advance to a regional, which they would also host. And I would presume if chalk goes, that would be Oregon State.
Ooh, and that'd be a good matchup. But going back to what I think, yeah, I mean, looking at it, Indiana State, I think, does provide a challenge on paper if you look at it against Kentucky. The other two teams, Western Michigan and Illinois. Western Michigan, I just think they're too middle of the road to really do anything major against Kentucky at this point in the season. I think Kentucky's too on fire for them. Illinois, I said it earlier, I don't think Illinois is going to win anything off their pitching. It's going to be offense, and I just don't know if they have the firepower, both with the power bats and just getting on base like Kentucky and Indiana State do to win. So then it comes down to the Sycamores and Wildcats. And to me, what stands out is I think Indiana State can do it if they catch Kentucky on bad pitching nights. With that being said, I don't think it'll be Trey Poozer. I think that'd come from guys like Travis Smith, maybe a bad Mason Moore day, something like that. Although Mason Moore, much respect to him, he doesn't have a lot of bad days either. I think that's the way to do it. I do think there needs to be an asterisk next to this regional for that reason. But with that being said, if I'm a betting man and betting money, I'm not. But if I'm choosing who I want to choose in general, I'm going to go Kentucky as well. I do think they make it out of here, although I could see them dropping maybe a game to Indiana State in the process.
Yeah, and even if this got to a Monday night, Travis Smith, I know wasn't great this year, but he's talented enough to pitch a big game and deliver them through. So I just think that the most complete team in this regional is Kentucky. It's also the team hosting. That's who we're going to take. We'll be talking about these games as they're played. Best way to get that, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. For Alfred Ezman, I'm Chris Lee. We are Southeastern 14, presented by BetOnline.